when the HOA president called the cops on me for trespassing near the lake. She didn't know she'd just picked a fight with the new owner of everything she thought she controlled. I had quietly purchased the lake reserve, the very land and water the entire neighborhood used for boating, fishing, and their fancy HOA parties. To them, I was just another outsider trying to make trouble. To me, they were a group of entitled neighbors about to learn the real meaning of ownership. So when the police arrived, I showed them papers that turned the whole situation upside down. The HOA had no idea their private lake wasn't private anymore, that every dock, boat, and clubhouse now fell under my name. What followed was a battle of pride, power, and paperwork that would leave the entire community stunned on me holding all the cards. I'd been searching for a peaceful place to unwind for months. After years of long hours at the office, the noise of the city, and constant stress, I wanted somewhere quiet, a place where I could sit by the water, listen to the birds, and feel like time had slowed down for once. That's when I came across a small real estate listing for a property called Lake Reserve. The photo showed a beautiful stretch of blue water surrounded by trees, with a small wooden dock and a gravel path leading down to the edge. It looked like the kind of place I could spend entire weekends fishing, kayaking, or just doing nothing at all. At first I thought the listing must have been an error. The price seemed too low for something that nice, especially since it was located in the middle of a high-end suburban neighborhood. But when I contacted the agent, she confirmed that it was indeed for sale and, surprisingly, no one else had made an offer. It used to be managed by the local homeowners association, she explained, but their lease expired 2 years ago. The rights reverted back to the original owner, who now wants to sell it privately. That made my ears perk up. I'd heard of HOAs before, and not in a good way. They were known for micromanaging every little thing: how tall your grass could be, what color your house could be painted, even what kind of mailbox you could install. The idea that an HOA might lose control of something they considered theirs sounded like it could be complicated. Still, the chance to own a lake was too tempting to ignore. I asked her to send over the documents so I could see what I was getting into. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and spread the papers out. The more I read, the more interested I became. The lake reserve wasn't part of any single homeowner's property. It was a standalone tract of land, complete with its own access roads, shoreline boundaries, and full water rights. The HOA had been leasing access to it for decades, using it for their neighborhood events, fishing tournaments, and family barbecue. But their lease had expired, and apparently, nobody in their leadership had noticed. They kept using the lake as if they still owned it. I almost laughed at the irony. For years, these people had assumed it was theirs, while the paperwork quietly said otherwise. It was all legal, clear, and perfectly valid. If I bought this land, I'd legally own every inch of the lake and its access points. That meant any dock, pier, or boat launch touching that water would technically be on my property. I didn't see it as an opportunity for conflict. I saw it as a chance to preserve the lake properly. From the looks of things, the HOA hadn't done a great job maintaining it anyway. The inspection report showed issues with erosion, unapproved construction near the banks, and neglected cleanups. The next morning, I called the agent again. "Let's move forward," I said simply. She sounded surprised, but pleased. Within a week, I had toured the site in person, walking along the calm shoreline as ducks glided across the glassy surface. The trees reflected beautifully in the water, and a soft breeze made tiny ripples shimmer in the sunlight. It was peaceful, exactly what I had been looking for. I imagined spending early mornings here with a fishing pole in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. It felt right. The process was smooth. Since the land had no competing offers, my bid went through instantly. The closing took less than 3 weeks, and just like that, the lake reserve was mine. I remember holding the deed in my hands for the first time. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had worked hard and saved for years. Owning something like this felt like an accomplishment, a reward for all those years of effort. When I told a few friends about it, they were impressed. "You bought a lake." One of them joked, "That's not a retirement plan, that's a dream." We all laughed, but deep down, I was proud. I didn't see it as a power move or an investment. To me, it was just a slice of peace and quiet in a world that never slowed down. I waited a few weeks before visiting again, wanting to give the county enough time to finalize the paperwork and record my ownership. When I finally drove back out there one Saturday morning, everything seemed calm and unchanged. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, and I could hear the faint hum of lawnmowers from the houses nearby. I parked near the old gravel trail, grabbed my fishing rod, and walked down to the dock. It looked like it had seen better days, but it still held firm. For a few blissful minutes, I stood there, breathing in the fresh air, and admiring the view. It felt like a dream come true. But just as I was about to cast my line, a small golf cart came speeding down the trail, kicking up dust. Behind the wheel was a woman wearing oversized sunglasses and a pinched expression, her hair perfectly styled despite the wind. Even before she opened her mouth, I could tell exactly who she was, the kind of person who lived for rules, control, and authority. "Excuse me," she shouted as she came to a halt a few feet away. "What do you think you're doing? This is private property." I turned slowly, holding my deed folder under my arm. "Actually, ma'am, I said with a calm smile. I think it's mine. Her eyebrows shot up in disbelief, and in that moment, I had no idea just how deep this small misunderstanding would go or how far she'd go to prove me wrong. The battle for the lake reserve had just begun. The morning was warm and peaceful, with the lake glittering like a sheet of glass under the sun. Birds chirped lazily from the trees, and a faint breeze carried the scent of pine. I stood at the edge of my new dock, soaking in the quiet and feeling proud that this calm slice of nature now belonged to me. I'd brought my fishing gear and a small cooler of sandwiches, planning to spend the day relaxing and maybe catching dinner. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is around. I'd just tossed my fishing line into the water when I heard the familiar hum of a golf cart behind me. I didn't even need to turn around. The sound was sharp, purposeful, someone driving not for leisure, but to enforce authority. The tires crunched on the gravel path, and a voice followed soon after. "Hey, you there?" she barked. "You can't be here. This lake is for HOA members only." I sighed, reeled in my line, and faced her. She was just as I remembered, mid-50s, with neat blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and an expression that could curdle milk. She sat behind the wheel of a spotless white golf cart, the HOA logo printed proudly on the side. "Morning," I said calmly. "I think you're mistaken. I actually own this property now." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "Excuse me? You own this? That's ridiculous." She scoffed. "This lake belongs to the community. It's been part of our neighborhood for decades." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, carefully removing a copy of the deed. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I explained, handing it to her. "I just bought the Lake Reserve property last month. The sale's official. You can check with the county records if you'd like." Karen stared at the paper for a few seconds, lips pursed, then let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. You think a piece of paper makes you the owner of our lake? This is a private community. You can't just walk in and claim something we all use." "I didn't claim it," I said evenly. "I purchased it. The HOA's lease expired 2 years ago, and no one renewed it. The seller had full rights, and now I do." Her face went red, the way a kettle boils just before it whistles. She jabbed a finger at me. "That's nonsense. I'm calling the police. You're trespassing." I sighed again, but I didn't argue. I simply nodded. "Go ahead. I'll wait." She whipped out her phone, turning her back to me as she paced in small circles, her voice rising with every word. "Yes, officer. There's a man here trespassing on our private lake. Yes, I'm the HOA president. He's refusing to leave." Her tone carried that confident righteousness only people like her seem to possess, the kind that makes them believe they can bend the law with their voice alone. I sat back on the edge of the dock, took a sip of my coffee, and waited. About 15 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up. Both officers stepped out, one of them already shaking his head slightly as if he knew this wasn't going to be a typical call. Karen hurried toward them, waving her arms. "Thank goodness you're here. This man is trespassing on our community property and refusing to leave. I want him removed immediately." The older of the 2 officers, a calm-looking man with graying hair, nodded politely but gestured toward me. "Let's just hear his side first. Ma'am?" I handed over my folder with the deed, the sale documents, and a copy of the county property map. The officer flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he read. His partner leaned in for a look, and they exchanged a glance that told me everything. After a moment, the older officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "it looks like he's telling the truth. According to these records, this entire lake and the surrounding land are now privately owned under his name. It's not HOA property anymore." Karen's jaw dropped. "What? That can't be right. We've used this lake for 20 years. The officer nodded patiently. "That may be true, but the HOA's lease expired, unless you renewed it. The rights went back to the original owner and he bought it legally." She looked like she'd been slapped. "You mean, we don't own the lake?" "I'm afraid not, ma'am," he said. "In fact, if your community's been holding events or building docks here without permission, that could technically be trespassing." For a long moment, Karen just stood there, speechless. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone. Then, with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes, she said, "Well, I suppose we'll have to verify that. But this isn't over." She shot me a glare so cold it could freeze water. I simply nodded. "I'm sure it isn't, but you're welcome to confirm everything with the county. I'll even email you a copy of the paperwork if you'd like." The officers gave me a small nod of respect before leaving, clearly used to dealing with situations like this. Karen, however, didn't drive off immediately. She sat in her golf cart, staring out at the lake for a long time, her expression unreadable. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how something like this could have slipped past her. As she finally turned the cart around and sped off. I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the last I'd see of her. She wasn't the type to admit defeat, especially not to someone she saw as an outsider. Still, as I cast my line back into the water, a small smile tugged at my lips. For now, the lake was quiet again, and the reflection of the sky danced peacefully across the surface. Whatever storm was coming, I was ready for it. because no matter how loud the HOA got, they couldn't change one simple fact: this lake was mine. The week after my encounter with Karen was oddly quiet, too quiet. For the first few days, I half expected someone from the HOA to show up again, maybe with a lawyer or another warning, but nothing happened. The lake was calm, the weather was perfect, and I finally got to enjoy a few peaceful mornings fishing alone. Still, I knew that silence didn't mean surrender, it meant plotting. And if there was one thing I'd learned from my years working in business, it was that people like Karen didn't just give up. They regrouped. My suspicion was confirmed one Thursday afternoon when I received a letter in the mail. It came in a crisp white envelope stamped with the HOAS logo. Inside was a 3-page notice filled with bolded legal language, claiming that I was in violation of community ordinances and demanding that I cease unauthorized use of shared recreational property. I almost laughed. They still hadn't accepted reality. At the bottom of the letter was Karen's signature, neat and angry. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I called the county clerk's office to double-check my property registration. Everything was in order. The lake, the shoreline, and all attached structures were listed under my name. I even had the full survey report to prove it. The HOA's claims weren't just wrong, they were desperate. That weekend, I decided to visit the lake again, just to make sure nothing had changed. As I drove down the narrow access road, I noticed something strange: balloons tied to street signs, colorful banners hanging from fences, and folding tables stacked near the entrance. At first I thought maybe it was a neighborhood birthday party, but when I saw a large banner that read HOA Summer Bash Lake Party this Saturday, I realized what was happening. Karen hadn't just ignored the ownership change, she was planning to throw their biggest annual event right on my property. I parked and walked down toward the lake. Sure enough, a group of HOA volunteers was already there, setting up tents, grills, and speakers. A few of them waved politely, probably assuming I was another neighbor. Then Karen spotted me. She was wearing a sun hat and carrying a clipboard, her expression souring the second our eyes met. "Oh, it's you," she said sharply. "You're not supposed to be here today. This is a private event for residents." I took a deep breath, staying calm. "Karen, you know as well as I do that this is my property. I own the lake and the land around it. You didn't ask for permission to hold your party here." She smirked. "We don't need your permission. The HOA has always hosted this event here. Tradition counts for something." "Tradition," I said slowly, "doesn't override ownership rights." She crossed her arms. "You can try to stop us, but good luck explaining that to 50 families who've been using this lake for 20 years. You're the outsider here." I didn't argue further. Instead, I turned and walked back to my truck. She probably thought she'd won that round, that I'd given up. But I wasn't angry, I was prepared. That evening, I called the county sheriff's department and explained the situation. The officer on the line was polite and understanding. When I mentioned the earlier incident with the police, he sighed and said, "We've dealt with that HOA before. As long as you have the deed, we'll make sure your rights are respected." He advised me to post signs and send a written notice before the event, just to make things official, so I did exactly that. The next morning, I drove out early and placed bright yellow private property access by owner's permission only signs around the shoreline and near the main path. I even took photos as proof. Then I printed copies of a formal notice stating that the HOA had no legal right to use or host events on my land. I taped one to their clubhouse door and sent a copy by email to the entire HOA board. Saturday morning came fast. From my porch across the road, I could already hear the thump of music and the chatter of dozens of voices. They'd gone ahead with the party anyway. Cars lined the street, children ran around with floaties, and people were unloading coolers and grills. It looked like a full-blown festival. I waited until things were in full swing before driving over. As I arrived at the entrance, the 2 deputies I'd spoken with were already there, standing beside their cruiser. Karen was mid-argument with them, waving her hands dramatically. When she saw me, her expression darkened. "There he is," she shouted, "the man trying to ruin our community." One of the deputies turned toward me. "Morning, sir. We've reviewed the property records. You are the registered owner of this entire lake and the adjoining access areas, correct?" I handed him the deed. "That's right," he nodded, turning to Karen. "Ma'am, this event is being held on private property without the owner's consent. You'll need to pack up and leave immediately." The crowd began to murmur. People looked confused, even embarrassed. Someone whispered, "Wait, he owns the lake." Another person asked, "Since when?" Karen stammered, "This is outrageous. He can't just, this is our lake." The deputy's tone hardened. "Ma'am, it's not. You've been informed of the change. If you refuse to leave, it'll be considered trespassing." Slowly, one by one, the partygoers began to gather their things. The music stopped, the laughter faded. What was supposed to be the HOA's grand summer event turned into a quiet, awkward exodus. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face pale with humiliation. As she passed me on her way out, she hissed under her breath, "You'll regret this." I met her glare with a calm smile. "No, Karen," I said softly. "I think the HOA will. When the last car pulled away, I stood by the water, the reflection of the sunset dancing across the surface. The lake was quiet again, just the way it was meant to be. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA wouldn't give up ice. They had pride, politics, and power on their side. But I had something much stronger: proof, patience, and the law. And I was ready for whatever came next. After the chaos of the failed summer party, things got tense around the neighborhood. Word spread fast about what had happened at the lake. Everyone had seen Karen's outburst and the deputies forcing everyone to leave. Some residents glared at me when I drove by, others whispered behind fences. But a few quietly nodded or waved as if to say, "Good for you." It was clear that not everyone in the HOA supported Karen's crusade, but no one dared to challenge her openly. For a few days, I thought maybe the drama was over. The lake returned to its peaceful rhythm. No more crowds, no loud music, just me, the sound of the water, and the gentle hum of cicadas in the trees. But then, one morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding on my front door. When I opened it, I found a man in a suit standing there, holding a large envelope. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "You've been served?" he replied, handing me the envelope before turning and walking back to his car. Inside were 30 pages of legal paperwork stamped with the HOA's name. They were suing me. The charges: unlawful acquisition of community property, public endangerment, and unauthorized restriction of shared resources. The wording was wild, like they were accusing me of stealing a national landmark. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity, but I also knew I couldn't take it lightly. HOAs were notorious for dragging people into long, messy legal battles just to wear them down. I called my attorney, a practical, no-nonsense guy named Daniel, who'd helped me with the property purchase. After I explained the situation, he let out a low whistle. "They don't have a leg to stand on," he said, "but they'll still try to make noise. HOAs rely on intimidation, will respond with documentation, and let the county handle it." He was right. A few days later, he filed our counterclaim with all the necessary records: the original deed, the expired lease, the county's official approval. Legally, it was airtight. But the HOA didn't back off. Instead, they doubled down. Karen started sending out newsletters to residents, calling me a threat to community harmony. She claimed I was holding the neighborhood hostage and profiting off shared land. It was all lies. But it stirred people up. One evening, I caught a group of men trying to remove my new private property signs. They bolted when I walked outside, leaving one half pulled from the ground. I replaced it immediately, and this time, I installed security cameras around the lake. If they wanted to play games, I was ready to play smarter. A week later, I received a call from the county courthouse. My hearing date had been scheduled. The HOA wanted the court to restore community rights over the lake. It was a ridiculous request, but I still felt a flicker of anxiety. You never really know how things will go once lawyers get involved. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Half the neighborhood seemed to have shown up, whispering and taking sides. Karen sat in the front row with her attorney, a sharp-looking man who clearly believed in her cause, or at least her checkbook. When the judge entered, the room went silent. The HOA's lawyer went first, dramatically painting me as some sort of opportunist who had swooped in and taken advantage of a clerical oversight. He talked about community heritage, tradition, and fairness. It sounded emotional, but it wasn't based on facts. Then Daniel stood up, calm and measured. He laid everything out piece by piece: the expired lease agreement, the official sale record, the county registry, and the HOA's failure to renew their contract despite multiple notices from the previous owner. "My client didn't exploit an error," Daniel said firmly. "He followed the law. The HOA simply neglected theirs." The judge flipped through the documents for several minutes before finally speaking. "I see no evidence of wrongdoing," he said. "Mr. Lawson is the rightful owner of the Lake Reserve property. The HOA's claim is dismissed with prejudice." Karen's face turned scarlet. The room murmured in shock. "But Your Honor," she started to protest. But the judge cut her off. "Ma'am, you had your chance to maintain this lease. You didn't. That's not theft, that's negligence." I couldn't help the small smile that spread across my face as the gavel came down. The HOA had lost. Completely. But the real consequences didn't hit until the following week. The ruling became public record, and word spread quickly. Real estate agents started calling me, explaining that several homeowners were panicking because their lakefront homes no longer technically had lake access. Property values began to dip. Realtors were fielding angry calls, and buyers were backing out of deals. I wasn't cruel about it. I didn't want to ruin anyone's life or investment. I just wanted to be treated fairly. So, I came up with a solution. I drafted an agreement offering residents the option to lease annual access to the lake for a small fee, far less than the HOA had ever paid before. It would give them legal permission to use the docks, fish, and host small gatherings, but under my terms. At first, most of them refused out of pride. But within weeks, reality hit. Without access rights, no one could legally use the lake, not even to dip their toes in the water. The HOA board received dozens of complaints. The same people who once glared at me now started knocking on my door, asking to talk. And then, one afternoon, Karen herself showed up. She looked exhausted, her perfect hair a little less perfect, her voice softer than usual. "We'd like to discuss your offer," she said quietly, handing me a folder. I nodded, inviting her to sit on the porch. For the first time, she didn't speak like a tyrant. She spoke like someone who finally realized she'd lost control. As we went over the agreement, I noticed her glance out toward the lake. "I just didn't think this could happen," she said. "We always believed it was ours." I looked at the water shimmering under the evening sun. "That's the thing about ownership," I said gently. "You either have it or you don't." Karen signed the papers that evening, her hand trembling slightly. When she left, I walked down to the water's edge, the air calm and quiet once more. The lake reflected the pink of the setting sky, perfectly still like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The next morning, the entire neighborhood buzzed with confusion. Police cars had come and gone, HOA members whispered among themselves, and Karen looked as if she hadn't slept all night. I woke up early, poured a cup of coffee, and stood on my porch overlooking the lake, my lake, watching the sunlight sparkle on the water that had caused all this drama. It was finally quiet, but I knew that peace was temporary. The HOA wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, at around 10 o'clock, Karen and 2 board members marched up my driveway again. This time, she carried a folder stuffed with papers. Her lips pressed into a hard line. "We need to talk," she snapped. "You've caused enough trouble for everyone here." I gestured toward the porch table. "By all means, let's talk," I replied calmly. Karen dropped the folder with a thud. "We've spoken to our attorney. The HOA is prepared to take you to court for restricting access to the lake. Our community rules have allowed residents to fish and swim there for over 20 years. You can't just take that away." I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Karen, you're free to take anyone you want to court. But before you waste your HOA funds, maybe you should read the county land deed records." I slid a document across the table. "See that the lake, the surrounding reserve, and all shoreline rights are registered under my company's name. That means every pier, every dock, every foot of that water is private property." The board members glanced at each other nervously. Karen's confidence faltered, but she tried to recover. "Even if that's true, you can't stop residents from walking down to the shore. That's community land." "Not anymore," I said, standing up. "When you filed your so-called lake improvement plan, the HOA accidentally transferred your easement rights to the reserve's holding trust, which I bought last month. So, legally speaking, the HOA doesn't even have lake access anymore. You might want to call your lawyer about that." Karen's face turned pale as she scanned the document, her voice trembling. "That's impossible." "Oh, it's possible," I said quietly. "And it's already recorded at the county office." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, and the sound of ducks echoed from the lake. Then Karen exploded, slamming her hand on the table. "You can't do this. The residents need that lake. They should have thought of that before trying to kick me off my own property," I replied. "You called the cops on me, trespassed, and even damaged my fence. I could press charges, but I'm not going to. I just want peace. From now on, access to the lake will require written permission. Any docks or boats built without authorization will be removed." Karen glared at me like she wanted to scream, but she couldn't argue. The truth was on paper and in her face. The other board members quietly excused themselves, clearly realizing she had led them into a disaster. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. The HOA sent out frantic letters to homeowners explaining that they were in negotiations with the lake's new owner. But those negotiations never happened, because I wasn't interested. I built a small dock for myself and installed cameras around the shoreline. No one dared step foot on the water without permission. Slowly, the neighborhood began to split. Some residents actually came over to apologize, admitting they didn't agree with how the HOA had handled things. Others resigned from the board entirely. By the end of the month, Karen had stepped down as president, claiming health reasons. Everyone knew it was because she had lost all credibility. One Saturday morning, as I was out on my boat fishing, I saw Karen sitting at the park bench overlooking the lake. Staring silently at the water she no longer controlled. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She had built her identity around authority, and now, that power was gone. I steered my boat closer to shore and called out, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She looked up, startled, then nodded weakly. "You really did win, didn't you?" she said softly. I smiled. "No one wins when people stop being neighbors, Karen. But I hope we can both enjoy the peace this lake brings." She didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't glare either. Maybe that was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I leaned back and watched the golden reflection dance across my lake. It had been a long, ugly battle, but I'd learned something important. Owning land wasn't just about property. It was about respect, boundaries, and standing your ground when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours. That night, I filed the final documents transferring the lake reserve into a private conservation trust, ensuring it would stay clean and protected for generations. The HOA could no longer touch it, and for the first time, I felt true peace in the neighborhood. The water was calm, the air was still, and I knew that, for once, justice had flowed exactly where it belonged. For more dramatic HOA stories and real-life twists, don't miss our next video on HOA Bright Reality. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one.